here we are at the final chapter of this short prophecy of Joel, a very punchy prophecy, starting with this day in the past, the day of the locust, that shows the devastating effects that sin has had on our world, and that day pointing ahead to a future day when God will deal with sin in the world once and for all. And that's where this prophecy to Joel culminates. We are now looking at the day of the Lord itself, and we'll see both the terrors of that day and the wonders of that day, and the seriousness of how God deals with sin should grow our wonder as we consider the gospel and what our Lord Jesus did for us on the cross. But before we get there, let's dig into this passage and pray before you do that. Read the passage a few times and let me highlight some of what I've noticed. So in this passage we've got three key characters, as it were. God himself is speaking, and he's speaking to two people. Throughout this section we see Judah and Jerusalem, or Israel, mentioned. Also Zion, Jerusalem. So this is our first key character that you see throughout this section: Judah, Jerusalem, Zion. And this represents God's people, the true Israel. God says here, my people Israel. So this isn't speaking only, or we know now that this isn't only speaking about the geographic, ethnic Israel. This is all God's people who make up the true Israel. And God is promising that he's going to restore their fortunes. And then the other key character we see in this section is the nations. I'll gather all nations. The nations, he mentions some specific nations in verse 4 and verse 19. We see Tyre, Sidon, Philistia, Egypt, Edom. Throughout the Bible, these nations are often used to represent the enemies of God as a whole. So the nations all the way through this passage. And as we saw, so Judah, Jerusalem, Zion, Israel, that represents God's people. The nations all the way through this section represent all who stand opposed to God. These are those who have hurt God's people. And as we see in this section, that if you hurt God's people, God takes that personally. Let me just show you this. I'll put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people, because they scattered my people among the nations. They divided up my land, cast lots for my people. Verse 4, what have you against me? These nations are standing opposed to God's people, and God takes that personally. He won't let them get away with it. It's a direct assault on God himself. And so the picture we're given here is in the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now this isn't a geographic place that you can go and visit. Jehoshaphat means Yahweh has judged. The Lord has judged. So this is the valley of judgment. And we see God says, I'm going to gather all nations. Everyone's going to be there. In verse 14 here, the valley of decision is the same valley. This is the valley of judgment. And all people are going to be there. And look at what God says here. I will swiftly and speedily return on your own heads what you have done. Same thing in verse 7. I will return on your heads what you have done. God is saying you're going to get a taste for your own medicine, of your own medicine. It's payback time. And the picture we're given is disturbing, to be honest. Verse 13. Well, just before we get to verse 13, you see the Lord says, proclaim among the nations, prepare for war. So these verses 1 to 8 are explaining why the judgment is coming, because these nations have stood opposed to God's people, which means they've stood opposed to him. The types of things God highlights here in verse 3, you've traded boys for prostitutes and sold girls for wine. They've sold boys and girls and used the money for prostitutes and wine. And God is saying your wickedness is a direct opposition against me. So that's why the judgment is coming. And then from verse 9 to 17 or 16 actually, we see what this judgment is actually going to be like, and it's a call to war. And it's a call to all the nations. It's a call that they cannot refuse, and it's a summons to a battle that they cannot win, which we see here in verse 13. Well, let's start at verse 12. Let the nations be roused, let them advance to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit and judge all the nations on every side. And look at this judgment. Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, trample the grapes, for the winepress is full and the vats overflow. So great is their wickedness. Now that is not a nice farming image. This is a picture of judgment. Harvest in the Old Testament, when spoken of in prophecies like this, is often the way God speaks about the judgment to come. Swing the sickle. It's a violent image. Trample the grapes. So great is their wickedness. Now, it is passages like this that can sometimes cause people to say, well, how can this be a God of love? Actually, this shows us that he is a God of love. God is going to deal with evil and wickedness once and for all, and that's a good thing. We all should be longing for evil to end. And I think the picture we're given here is just trying to give us a taste for how seriously God views rebellion against him. We minimize sin. We don't view sin nearly as seriously as God does. And God is showing here that if you stand opposed to him, you will not stand on that day. Swing the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Now, after this picture of judgment, all of a sudden, in halfway through verse 16, we get this contrast. But the Lord will be a refuge for his people. What incredible words. A stronghold for the people of Israel. How is that possible? How is this picture that we're given going to actually be possible for us? Never again will foreigners invade her. Judah will be inhabited forever through all generations. So from this picture of disaster and the terrible consequences of rebellion against God, we then get this picture of people finding their refuge in the Lord and never having to worry about invaders again. It's a place of safety. It's a place of great riches. Mountains dripping wine, hills flowing with milk, ravines running with water. And it's a place of that people will be forever. An everlasting safety and abundance with the Lord forever. It's a beautiful picture. The big question is, how can people escape this and enjoy this? because the reality is all of us are by nature sinners. We are rebels against God, and we actually deserve to face God's just judgment. We deserve to stand in this valley of decision. And so how can we escape the valley of decision, or the valley of Jehoshaphat, and actually enjoy this other valley that we read of at the end of verse 18? A fountain will flow from the Lord's house and will water the valley of acacias. That's the valley we want to be in. That's not. And I think the only way we can understand this is, again, to put on our New Testament glasses and to see between this valley of decision and this valley of abundance and safety. Between these two valleys, we have to see the cross, because it is only through our Lord Jesus that we can find refuge, that we can be with our Lord in his forever place of safety and abundance. And so this passage has to drive us to the cross. And we actually need these first horrific verses describing the judgment that's coming. We need to see how seriously God views sin, so that we can truly delight in what our Lord Jesus has achieved for us on the cross. Because our Lord Jesus took the sickle swing, as it were, of God's wrath against sin. He took that for us, so that we can enjoy God's forever place with him. And that is monumental. We so easily forget how seriously God views sin. And this passage reminds us of that. And that should then cause us to tremble. But not to remain just shaking in our boots. It should cause us to run to our Lord Jesus at the foot of the cross and cry out for his mercy, so that we can then take refuge in him and enjoy the promise of eternity with him. So as you dig further into this passage, I hope that it grows your joy and your wonder in the gospel, and as you teach it to others, help them to see the seriousness of how God is going to deal with sin, the wonder of what is secured for those who take refuge in him, and then point them to the cross, because that is the only place that we can go if we want to enjoy God's safety and his abundance with him forever. Well, God bless as you dig further into this passage, and as you teach it to others, I pray that you will help them to delight in the gospel.